Earlier today, I spoke to the Shadow International Trade Secretary, Barry Gardiner. Barry Gardiner, you and Jeremy Corbyn today brandished detailed leaks of meetings between British and American trade officials. What evidence do they contain that the Tories plan, as your party claims, to sell off the NHS to Donald Trump's America?
They very clearly set out that they have discussed full access, which means the abolition of the control that we have through NICE of the cost-effectiveness of drugs.
Right, but that's about drugs. What plans do they contain that show the Tories plan to sell off the NHS?
Well, Andrew, you have to understand that the NHS is not a building that you sell. What you do is it's a series of services, and what they're proposing to do is to make those services open so that they can be competed for and against the Americans in a marketplace where they would be sucking millions of dollars out of our NHS, destroying the capacity that we have then to provide other services for our patients.
So it's American competition, you fear, not selling off the NHS to America?
Look,
that's what your party says.
Yes. It's a way of trying to communicate to people that there are different ways in which you can destroy the NHS. One of them is by ensuring that money is sucked out of the system and that costs are increased. And if you look at what Professor Andrew Hill has said, who's an advisor to the World Health Organization, when assessing the relative costs of drugs that we would pay if we were to pay American prices, which is what these trade negotiations show the Americans are wanting to do, it would be an extra 27 billion. At the moment we pay 18 billion.
Hold on. Our total drugs bill from all over the world is 18 billion.
Yes, indeed.
Not just America, from everywhere.
Yes.
Your leader is saying that a trade deal with America will add 26 billion a year to the drugs bill. Why would that work out?
Sorry, it's not the Labour Party that's saying that. This is Professor Andrew Hill, who is the advisor.
Jeremy Corbyn has said that with a free trade deal with America, drugs will go up by 500 million a week, which is about 26 billion a year.
Actually 20,
that's Mr. Corbyn. It's almost 27.
It's actually, yes, it's
How would that be if our total drugs bill is only 18 billion?
We're quoting what Andrew Hill, the professor who is the advisor to the World Health Organization, himself has said.
And do you know what assumption he made to get the 26 billion figure?
If we were paying the same prices as the Americans are paying for those drugs.
What he said was, if we paid American prices for drugs we bought from all over the world, not just American prices. We would say to France, we'll give you American prices too. We'd say to India, we'll give you American prices. It's ludicrous, and you know that that figure is scaremongering.
I'm sorry. We've been very clear in that we've quoted Andrew Hill and exactly what he said.
But his assumption is ludicrous.
It's not ludicrous because, of course, once you engage in a trade agreement with America to big American pharmaceutical companies, those big drug companies, if we're paying that rate to them, and that's what both President Trump and Lighthizer, the trade representative, have both said, they say that we're freeloading on their system. They want us to pay more so that Americans can pay less. We will not accept that because that will destroy the funding for the NHS.
That the British side has agreed to that.
What you have is 6 meetings over a period of 2 years in which they have said that they've come to the point where they are now ready to draft the wording that would go into the eventual trade agreement.
No, they're ready to draft the next stage of the negotiations on which they would be based. I ask you again, is there anything in these documents to show that Britain has agreed to any of this?
Andrew, can I just point out that if ministers are allowing civil servants to go off and negotiate this, either they're in control of it, in which they know what's going on, or they're not in control.
Barry Gardiner, these are not negotiations. These are scoping out talks.
No,
they are. Sorry. For example, let me just come to the point. Are you claiming, as Mr. Corbyn did today, that we've agreed to full US market access to Britain?
That is precisely what has been discussed.
Have we agreed to it?
Not yet, because we can't. We can't agree to it at this stage because we haven't left the European Union, as you well know.
You see,
the point is, though, Andrew, that actually all of this is being discussed. And you will remember that when Boris Johnson was on the television the other night, he looked directly into the camera and he said, this is nonsense. This is not happening. He denied that these negotiations were going on. Now, you say they're not negotiations, and technically we can't negotiate with America.
And they're scoping talks.
But
let me just, I've seen all that. Barry Gardiner, let me ask you this. And I want to come on to some important things here, but let me ask you this, because you talk about total market access. What the document says, and it's the British describing the American position, because that's what they were there to find out, not to negotiate, to find out the American position. And Mr. Corbyn part-quoted this bit. The US approach makes total market access the baseline assumption of the trade negotiations. That's an accurate quote? But he didn't go on to repeat the rest of the sentence. What does that say?
Well, you've got it there, so you tell me.
Well, you don't know.
Well, I've got it here. If you want me to find it, then I'll have
well, I've got it here because you probably won't find it there. It goes on to say, and the US approach requires the other country to identify exclusions. In other words, the US say, we think everything should be on the table, but it's up to you to tell us what you think is not on the table. But you didn't add that today, did you?
No, I'm sorry. Actually, if you look at what they've said about the negative list approach, which is precisely this approach that they adopt, that says everything should be included unless specifically included, they have...
No, they've said everything should be included unless specifically excluded,
that's what I've just said.
Meaning Britain could exclude what it wants.
The point is...
That's the point.
No, it's not. Because what you have to understand about a negative list system is this, that any future service, any new technological breakthrough in our health service would automatically then be open for attack by the Americans. And
this says we can exclude what we want.
You can't exclude from a trade agreement that which does not exist.
But at the moment we could exclude it, and you didn't quote that second part, which shows you're misleading. But you've
absolutely not.
You've not just been misleading as that.
Andrew,
there's a real sniff of scaremongering.
Stop a second, because you've accused me of misleading.
Well, you are misleading.
We can't be misleading when we have given these documents to you in the press. We've made it absolutely transparent. The people who are misleading here is the government, who have for years refused to get these documents into the public domain.
You don't show what you claim. That's why it's misleading. And there's more than a sniff of Labour scaremongering there. Let's just show our viewers what Mr. Corbyn, on the back of these documents, emailed to voters today. See what he said. Imagine opening a 5-figure bill for your cancer treatment. Imagine paying to give birth, paying to have a checkup at the GP. This is not only a plot against our NHS, it's a plot against our whole country. Where in these documents does it say we'll be getting 5-figure bills for cancer treatment?
You will recall that in his speech this morning, Jeremy Corbyn actually quoted the differential prices. It was for one particular drug, which is more than 5 times the cost if we get it from America than it is from the way in which we procure it in the UK.
We don't pay. You say, imagine opening a 5-figure bill. In Britain, because of our NHS, we don't get bills. So where does it say we'd end up patients would be getting bills?
The point is here, if you're paying so much extra for the drugs that you pay for in the NHS, it means that you cannot, as the NHS, afford to be providing so many other services.
It's a long stretch.
No, it's not.
Where does the document say we're going to have to pay for a checkup at the GP?
It doesn't say that.
So why raise that as a possibility?
Well, because it's something that has been mentioned, as you well know, by Tory policy advisors in the past.
It is not Conservative policy
at the moment
pay.
It's not.
Where does it say we'd have to pay to give birth in these documents?
Andrew, what it does say in these documents...
No, I'm asking you, where does it say that? Because that's what your leader's claiming.
It's very easy to say what a document doesn't say and just to go through a list. But that's not the point. The point here is that actually the document goes through in a number of ways, not only a negative list, but in the way in which it's talking about the extension of patent life. Because if you extend the patent life from 10 to 20 years, then we're paying the higher price for those drugs during the entirety of that period. These are all the things that have been discussed, which this government said were not being discussed.
And there is no indication in these documents that we've agreed to any of that.
Because we cannot yet. But the point is the government...
You could give indications, give indications, but there's none.
Andrew, the government claims that this is not being discussed. They've said that these discussions aren't taking place. They've actually had the Prime Minister staring into the camera to state that categorically. They are taking place.
These discussions...
And it shows precisely the way in which our health service
Gardiner,
is under attack.
These are important issues for people, because you're talking about birth, you're talking about cancer treatment, you're talking about checkups at the GP, and you're scaring people on the basis of no evidence in that document whatsoever.
I'm sorry.
Document 1 doesn't even mention the NHS.
Andrew.
Document 1 doesn't mention... Document 2...
Sorry.
Document 1 does not mention the NHS. Document 2...
That is a ridiculous and a naive thing to say. And you are too smart a journalist for me to allow you to get away with it. Okay?
I'm sorry. Where does it mention the NHS?
The point is this.
The point is it doesn't mention the NHS.
It talks about services. It talks about pharmaceutical services. It talks about intellectual property rights, which relate to pharmaceutical services. You know very well that the NHS is absolutely, ripped through the entirety of this document, because it is about the way in which services are provided, procured and paid for.
Mr. Garber, these documents
NHS.
are about pharma. They're about drugs. That's what these discussions are really about.
And drugs are about the NHS.
But let me finish the question. They are scoping out the nature of what trade talks could be when real negotiations, if and when they begin. The United States is the biggest pharma producer in the world. The United Kingdom is in the top 5 pharma producers in the world. It is inevitable that pharma will be discussed.
Oh, is
for
it?
trade talks.
Well, in that case, you're saying that the Prime Minister is a liar?
No, what I'm saying
He said it's not going to be. He said drug prices, I'm sorry, he said drug prices are not going to be discussed. They've said that. This government has said that. And you are now saying it's inevitable.
I'm saying
what we're
it's
saying
inevitable
is that is what
in
is happening.
scoping conversations, the Americans will want to talk pharma.
No, you didn't.
Are you surprised by that?
Sorry, you didn't.
Of course.
Recall what you actually said. What you said is, if and when those negotiations do take place, it is inevitable that drug pricing will be part of it, is what you actually said.
Well,
and that is precisely what this Tory government have denied.
I said it's inevitable that pharma will be discussed. And in that discussion, there will be a discussion about patents. And patents do affect prices, because the longer they're in patent, the more expensive they are.
That's my point.
But all trade talks involve that. The EU, when it negotiated with Canada, wanted longer pharma patent times. There's nothing unusual in that. But you scaremonger on saying we'll get 5-figure bills for cancer treatment.
You know very well that this government has claimed that no talks are taking place that would prejudice the NHS. These talks do prejudice the NHS. They are not yet able to negotiate because we haven't yet left the EU. If and when we do leave the EU, this forms the basis of those talks. And in all the ways that we've been discussing, it means that our NHS is under attack from big American drug companies. In each of the negotiations that America has done, whether it's been with Canada, with Mexico, with other countries, at every stage, the key objective that they have had and the billions of pounds big American drug companies have put into Congress in their backing for politicians there has been to obtain that objective, and they've succeeded because the drug prices in those countries have gone up.
You've had your say. Thank you very much.
Thank you.